Well, we are in the midst of our Quest series of messages this year where we are exploring God's story together. We're walking through the whole story of the Bible, and we have the opportunity to encounter all of the good and the bad and the ugly of the Bible. We are definitely in the bad and the ugly part of the Bible. And so let me give you a roadmap of what's happening on this journey as we get to the part in May that's all about division. In other words, this kingdom that God established that begins to fall apart. We find ourselves in a section right now in between King Solomon and how everything unravels after him, and before the prophets come to call people back to the way. We are in this in-between time where we have the kingdom dividing into two sections, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And you get to see, as you would with some really cheesy Sunday school art here, the difference between Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And I got to tell you, most of the time it is pretty easy for me to look into a section of Scripture and to pull out the pearl, to pull out the jewel of what we should talk about. There is nothing for us to talk about that corresponds with Mother's Day in this section, except for the following possible topics. Number one, this is the section of the Bible of what happens if children don't listen to their mothers. Number two, what do you do if your grandmother is worshiping false idols? Or number three, how to feel better about modern American politics. Because you're going to read this week 1 Kings chapter 12 through 16, and you're going to say, yeah, it's bad, but it ain't that bad. Because it's really bad in this portion of the Bible. Fortunately, there is an escape hatch that I have not availed myself of thus far this year, and that is we have a Psalm of the Week. And that is what I am going to focus on today. Psalm 46 is a psalm about how do you pray when your world seems to be falling apart. And so what I'd like to do is to recite for you Psalm 46 to let you hear it, and then we'll take a closer look. God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Though the waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, a holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. The Lord lifts up his voice and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations that he has brought on the earth. He makes the wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and he shatters the spear and he burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. It's hard to read a prayer right now that talks over and over again about how refuge may be found in God without being haunted by the images that we are seeing every single day of Ukrainian families, particularly women and children, by the millions fleeing like this grandmother and daughter here, this mother saying goodbye to a child as she puts him on a train, or this image here, and the anguish and the grief of a mother pushing 3 children. God is a refuge for the refugee. In the midst of this prayer, there are two images of what your life is like when things tend to fall apart. These two images are of one of natural disasters, of earthquakes, of tsunamis, of ground shaking and rocks falling. And the second image of a world that is falling apart is the image of a battlefield, of being caught in the midst of a larger conflict. When I see those images of the refugees and I hear of a battle that forces people to flee, this is not just a media thing for me. This is personal to me and my family. Some of you know that my grandfather, during World War I, that their farm in East Germany became the front in the Great War. And like this image here of the women and children who had to get on trains and flee, this is my grandfather's story as a young boy. They fled east to Russia, only to find themselves thrust into something called the Bolshevik Revolution. My great-grandmother selling enough eggs over the course of years that one by one she sent her children across the sea to the United States of America, to where one by one on their own the children landed here on Ellis Island, like this image from the 1920s of children being examined as they enter into the country. God indeed is a refuge for those whose world is falling apart, shaking beneath their feet, for those for whom their life is caught up in a bigger war or conflict that they really don't have anything that they can do about it. And so today I want to enter into this sacred and solemn prayer, this one that means so much to us. That just as in the Old Testament, when things seem to be crumbling with bad king after bad king after bad king, and for us who are caught in our situations, both in this country and around the world, when your world is crumbling, what do you pray? What do you repeat? What do you do? First, let's talk about what you pray. This famous line here that opens up Psalm 46. Say this with me. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way. Notice the words in bold there of when you pray, when you ask God to be your shelter, your strength, your assistance. God has an amazing ability to answer those prayers. I saw this vividly when I became the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of San Antonio. It was 2005, and if you recall what significant event happened in America in 2005, it was this storm. It was Hurricane Katrina, leveling particularly the city of New Orleans. And in the city of San Antonio, all of a sudden we found thousands upon thousands of refugees escaping and coming to our city. We asked the city officials how we as a church could help, and they say, you know what we need the most help with? We don't have enough medical facilities for those who are fleeing New Orleans. Not that they just need a bed and a place to sleep and a place to shower. We need people with some medical expertise and people willing to go the extra mile. Would you be an emergency medical shelter for victims of Katrina? We were a large enough church that had enough healthcare workers in it. We said sure. And so for several months, when I had a break in the schedule, I would walk downstairs to where there was bed after bed on the lower floor of our church. And I would sit with people to hear their stories. And the most consistent thing that I heard was, the waters were rising in my care facility, and I didn't think I was going to survive. And I prayed. And it literally brought us to a church who welcomed us in. And they would say things like, I can't believe you guys are doing this. I can't believe that you've helped to rescue us. You've restored our faith in God. I don't believe the prayer for God to be a refuge and a help and a strength is a formula that you can manipulate. But I promise you this, when the waters are rising in your life, if you were willing to cry out to him in that way, in surprising ways, he will meet you in the midst of that chaos, of that storm. So that is what I think we ought to pray. Then the question is, what ought we to repeat? For you see, in this short prayer, there are a couple of verses that repeat, and you would think in something that is so short that they wouldn't need to be repetitious, and yet there is something here that is so important that it says it twice. Will you say it with me? The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. This requires a little more explanation. The phrase, the Lord Almighty, in some English translations is translated as the Lord of hosts, which is kind of a strange phrase because you're like, why is the God of hospitality in the midst of this chaotic prayer? But the Lord of hosts is not a phrase that has anything to do with hospitality. It is the phrase that is better translated as the Lord of armies. Notice it's not the Lord with armies. It's the Lord of armies. The Lord of all the armies of the earth. In other words, everything that is happening, there is someone who is more sovereign over all of the armies that are happening right now in the world. There is someone who is more powerful. There was someone who is more in charge. This God who is in charge is with us. The Bible describes this God with us as ever present. Not present for a moment and then gone in the next. That God is always with us. And that this God is the same God as the God of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Rachel. It is a God that connects through the generations. So as we think about God, we don't make up God as we go along, but that this revelation of God, this person of God has been brought down even to us in our moment in time. And so the God of armies is always with us, this God that is the same God of our forefathers and foremothers, and that he is our fortress. Tim Keller puts it this way: you know who your God is. He's the one that you run to when your world seems to be falling apart. Where do you go when things get hard? Who do you turn to? Where do you seek shelter? One of my favorite stops, because it's so jaw-droppingly beautiful and shocking, is this place when we go to Israel. This is the famous archaeological site of Herod the Great's fortress in Masada along the cliffs that overlook the Dead Sea. And when I take a group to Israel, we stand at the top of this fortress and we hear about the mad genius that is Herod the Great. For he believed that where David hid in the wilderness, he would build a fortress and live in luxury. My friends, the question is, what is your fortress? Because God is alive, well, and present, and active, and secure. And what Herod the Great thought would be a fortress that would never fall has crumbled to rocks. Do you see God as your fortress? Or do you see entertainment and escapism? Do you see workaholism and achievement? Do you see ambition and accomplishment, or family, or the security of community? Many of those things are good things, but they're not your fortress. And so I think we ought to not only pray for God to be our refuge and our help and our strength. I think like what we learn in the heart of this psalm is that we ought to, and I challenge you to repeat over and over again, the Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. For that to be something that you commit to memory and you say over and over again, because I think as we practice those words, as we repeat those words, maybe we'll start to believe them. And then there's the question of, what do you do? What do you do when you feel like your world's crumbling around you and the earth is shaking and you're caught in between warring parties? This is what the text says. Will you say this with me? Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Breaking into this prayer which is us declaring and praising and talking with God, God breaks into this prayer and talks back. And the first thing that he says is to be still. I love how the Hebrew language is so much more concrete than our English. The phrase be still is actually very specific instructions for put your arms down at your side. In other words, we have this tendency to flail about as things get more chaotic. And God says, as things are getting chaotic and as your world is falling apart, stop flapping your arms around like you can do something. Put your arms down by your side. Be still. We try to medicate today the chaos and anxiety and fears that we feel by staying in motion. But sometimes our movement and our activity causes us trouble of its own. Decades ago, I read a fantastic book by Robert Kurson that's called Shadow Divers, and it's about this rare group of, crazy people who are people who specifically dive in shipwrecks. They go down into ancient boats, submarines, places that no rational person would go. Because it's one thing to be underneath all of the pressure of all of that water. It's another thing to enter into the confined space of the darkness of a sunken vessel that has been there for a long time, and many people die with this hobby. And the primary way that they die is that they run out of air from panicking. And that the primary way that they panic is they get into a confined space and they move too quickly, and because of that, they kick up all of the sediment that's in that confined space, which fills that space to such a degree with such chaos that you can no longer tell where you're going and you can't see anything in front of your face. Even if you cry out for help, even if there's someone else who could hear you, sound waves in water travel, but you cannot tell from which they are coming. And so if somebody doesn't know specifically where you are, you cannot be rescued. And so Kurson puts it like this. A diver lost or tangled inside a shipwreck has come face to face with his maker. Corpses have been recovered inside wrecks, eyes and mouths agape in terror. The poor diver still lost, still blinded, still snagged, still penned. Yet a curious truth pertains to these perils. Rarely does the problem itself kill the diver. Rather, the diver's response to the problem, his panic, likely determines whether he lives or dies. When your world is falling apart, sometimes you have a tendency to panic, to fear, to move. And you and I are kicking up so much sediment that we get completely disoriented. And we run out of the oxygen of what God has provided. The first thing you need to do when your world seems to be falling apart, counterintuitive, is to put your arms at your side and to be still. But it's not just being still for the sake of being still. It is being still so that you may know that He is God. I was meeting with a group of college students hearing about their experience at college recently. And we were hearing their stories and hearing them talk about their college experiences. When one student who practices Islam said, and I quote, "I identify as a Muslim." And then said a little bit later, she referred to this as her truth. And my head almost exploded. Because either Yahweh is God or Allah is God. Is Muhammad the only prophet, or is Jesus the Son of the living God? And it is not so much whether or not we identify with Christianity or identify with Islam or identify as a Buddhist. It is whether or not these realities actually describe what is going on in the universe and whether or not they are true. My friends, we are obsessed in an individual age with things, and it's like, well, that's my truth, we say defensively. You need to know there is truth, there is reality, and that the way and the truth and the life is Jesus Christ. And it is not so much about what you identify with. It is so that you and I need to learn in our prayers to be still in a world that is falling apart in order for us to know that He is God. That is reality. That is the truth. And that truth is so much more important than you can know right now as you sit in the comfort of this sanctuary or as you watch from the comfort of your couch at home. Be still and know that I am God. I want to show you a picture of a family in this church. This is the Hinkle family. Rebecca Hinkle is the mother of this family. It was not that long ago that she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. With every possible advanced treatment, experimental treatment available to her, it just wasn't working. Watching the service of Easter, the time had come where the medical professionals had thought that this was all that we could do. And they thought that as they started the conversation about hospice, that this was going to be a battle, because people don't usually like to give up to go to hospice. And yet being reminded of the Easter promises, after hearing and celebrating and singing and praising with her church, even though it was from a distance and through technology, Rebecca went into that doctor's office and said, "I'm not afraid of hospice because I know what I believe and I know where I am going." Be still. Know that I am God. And even when your world is falling apart, exalt him. Praise him. Worship him. Here is a mother who knows the gospel. Here is a reality that you can plant your feet firmly on. Unplanned, this family requested that at the funeral this coming week, the memorial service in this sanctuary, just a couple of days from now, they requested to sing the hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," which is Martin Luther's paraphrase, a song of the very Psalm 46 that we've been talking about today. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe does seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal. And did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. We're not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. You ask who that may be. Christ Jesus, it is he, Lord Sabaoth, Lord of hosts, Lord of armies is his name. And from age to age the same, and he must win the battle. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, and we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him. And that word above all earthly powers, no thanks to them abideth. The Spirit and the gift are ours, through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom, his kingdom, his kingdom.